Is UConn catching Duke at the perfect time? You're locked on UConn.
You are Locked On Yukon, your daily podcast on the Yukon Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a quick moment to ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content here, please take a second to subscribe to the show. Follow the audio versions wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. It really helps the show grow, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. It means the world to me. Also, every follow, every subscription, every download of this podcast helps create more revenue for UConn NIL, as we are giving a 10% donation to Bleeding Blue for Good. So by supporting Locked On UConn, you are directly affecting the UConn athletic program. Thanks so much for being a part of this Locked On community. Today's episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Go to 5hourenergy.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. Well, on today's show, we welcome to the show, I'm going to get him in here. We welcome in a local broadcaster of my neck of the woods. Today, we're joined by Josh Graham, radio host for WSJS in the Triad here in North Carolina, an expert on all things ACC. We've got a big matchup coming up between UConn and Duke this Saturday, and we're going to break it down. Josh, let me ask you this question. Even though historically, Duke, they're coming off a gritty win at Northwestern and are sitting at 2-0, historically, a 3-0 start has led them to bowl eligibility. So the stakes are high for them. But with injuries piling up, could UConn be catching Duke at the perfect time, especially with a schedule that has North Carolina, Georgia Tech, and Florida State just around the corner?
I'd say you'd be catching them at the right time, the perfect time, if this game were next week and it was the week before you play North Carolina and you're already 3-0 versus next week being against Middle Tennessee. But it does seem you catch a break with Duke winning that game at Northwestern and perhaps feeling a little bit better about themselves than if they would have lost that game, because this is a Duke team that's flawed. It's been obvious through the first couple of games. And a long time ago, a coach told me, a basketball coach, that when you get a team coming off a loss, they're generally more crispy the next time you get them. You're not going to get a crispy version of the Blue Devils when they play UConn at Wallace Wade Stadium this weekend. So in that sense, it probably is a positive.
Well, that's true. I like that analogy. I appreciate that. How big of a factor will recent injuries to players like Jaquez Moore and Nick Morris play in this game?
Oh, it definitely will play a factor. You certainly have to monitor these things. It's funny. You mentioned how we cover the ACC. I was mentioning to Jim Phillips just a few weeks ago, the ACC commissioner. Come on, we need complete transparency when it comes to the injuries now. If the SEC could get to a place where they're telling us about injuries, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get to that point where we have the information, not even just from betting perspectives, but from perspectives where you and I could have conversations about these games a lot clearly and have a better sense for the health of teams going into the game. But we'll get to it in a bit. But the spread of this game, I was surprised to see where it was, opening up at 16.5 or so, where when you consider some of the struggles that Duke's had offensively. And yes, injuries will play into the result too, and that's something that Vegas considers when putting those numbers out.
Yeah, and listen, I've never been one to follow a format, so let's just talk about that really quick.
Let's do it.
Because I think people would be interested to understand your thought process here, because we'll get into predictions later. I'm not even asking you for scores or if you think
Sure.
Duke's going to cover or UConn's going to backdoor or whatever. But do you think that UConn, coming off of, I mean, they scored, I know they played Merrimack, it's not exactly a football powerhouse, but they did look like a team that was just was coming off of an embarrassing loss against Maryland, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that factors into these point spreads with 100% certainty, that down 50-7 the first game, they were a 20 point underdog, did not cover that. Maryland obviously covered that spread.
Yeah.
And then they go into Merrimack and blow their doors off. Do you think that kind of augments the spread a little bit where Duke is struggling? They figure UConn's offense is maybe a little bit back to normal of what they thought they were going to be?
I think it's also talent level. Like a lot of you are still talking about ACC talent, and
Sure.
Mike Elko did a really good job of recruiting talent, and it's a lot of these guys. When Manny Diaz first got to Duke, it wasn't a rebuilding message; it was a sustaining message. Now that didn't lead to him keeping Riley Leonard, who ended up transferring to Notre Dame. Not going great early on for Riley, or fair we
Yep.
say a bit up and down, winning in College Station and then losing your home debut against Northern Illinois. But you lose your head coach, you lose a lot of guys, but there's especially on defense, you still have the heart of last year's team still on this roster. So there's a lot of winning that's happened, and we're still looking at a lot of the recruiting successes that Mike Elko had baked into a line when you consider just the talent level when you compare the two sides. But the reason why it surprised me, the line's where it's at, is because of how offensively challenged Duke has been through the first couple of weeks. The first week, they labored their way to scoring 26 points against Elon FCS competition. And then last week, you're talking about 13-13 at the end of regulation, and you had to scratch and claw to get there. Now they ultimately scored 26, but that required double OT in order to get there. Malik Murphy, who is the Texas transfer, I don't think he's been exactly what Duke thought they were getting, especially when you consider one of the more underrated receivers in all of college football, Jordan Moore, is on the outside. And Jordan Moore is a fascinating story because he once started as a quarterback before transitioning to being a receiver. So I threw a lot at you there. There are a lot of elements, but that's why I was a little surprised at 16.5, because Duke barely was able to score 13 and scored 26 against Elon. So if UConn can score double digits in this game, I think you're looking at a cover.
All right. Well, we're going to shift our focus coming up. We're going to shift our focus to UConn and what will they need to do. And I can help you out with that a little bit, I guess, is to have not have a repeat performance of last year coming up after this. Want to take a moment to give a heads up on a brand new mobile game that I think you guys are going to love as much as I do. The Ultimate College Football HC Head Coach. In this amazing game and simulation, you get to step into the shoes of a head coach and lead your college football program to glory. Can you imagine actually being the head coach of UConn football? From recruiting players, hiring coaching staff, to overseeing training camps and handling school scholarships, you control every crucial detail of your program. It's all in your hands. Will you be able to handle the pressure? And here's what I really love about the game. You're responsible for calling offensive plays. Your strategy will not only determine the success of your football program, but they'll shape the future and legacy of your team. Ultimate College Football HC is completely free and has no ads and is 100% playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and then whenever you want to. And of course, we have a special offer from Locked On. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program. Make sure to take an advantage of this as it will get your team off to a strong start. Download this game. Just visit ultimate-cfb.com or look it up in the app stores. Okay, you're back on Locked On UConn. We're with Josh Graham of WSJS in the Triad. Josh, UConn had some trouble last year. It was a tough one for the Huskies against a very, very good Duke squad, losing 41-7 at the Rent in East Hart in Connecticut. But UConn showed some flashes of promise in that game, especially on defense, where they held Duke to just 80 yards rushing.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what does UConn need to do differently this time to compete with, as you've coined it, ACC talent, especially with Duke on the road?
I think they need to replicate exactly what they did a year ago, and that's holding Duke in check on the run and making this a game where Malik Murphy's the one having to beat you. Riley Leonard was fully capable of doing that last year, but the best news for UConn fans is that when you look at the players who scored touchdowns in that game, it's Jordan Waters with a couple of touchdowns. He's now at NC State. It's Riley Leonard with a rushing score. It's Riley Leonard with the passing score. Those guys aren't at Duke anymore. So if you're able to make Duke one-dimensional and it's not Riley Leonard throwing the ball, instead it's Malik Murphy, I think you give yourself a shot. That's the way it should begin. It should be noted, though, somebody who is back is a guy we just talked about, Jordan Moore, who last year had 8 catches for 86 yards and a touchdown. So that's a player to have circled. It's number 8 for Duke because last year UConn successfully made Duke one-dimensional, and they weren't really all that successful running the ball, but Jordan Moore was the guy who killed you time and time again. He's the one returning player for Duke that had a touchdown in that game. So if that's not enough of a key, there it is. See if you can limit number 8 and limit the Duke run.
Talk to me about Duke's offensive scheme, because one of the things that UConn struggled against Maryland with is these bubble screens, these quick little passes that essentially led to longer touchdowns. Like Billy Edwards Jr. has a cannon. They have some good vertical threats in Maryland. They didn't really burn UConn deep. UConn gave up 298 yards of yak in that game, yards after catch. So is that I admittedly, I watched a little bit of Duke Elon. I did not watch any of the Northwestern game. What is Duke's offensive identity? Do they play kind of an RPO style? Because I know, they have Malik Murphy who can run a little bit, has a great arm. They had Riley Leonard doing something similar last year. I'm curious what your thoughts are on kind of their offensive identity and what we can look for, because I know what UConn fans don't want to see, which is these bubble screens where they're breaking 14 tackles and getting 20 and 30-yard gashing plays.
There's more of that than there is RPO. Last year, there was a lot of RPO with Kevin Johns. And one of the more surprising local coaching moves that were made was last year, Duke had an excellent offensive coordinator in Kevin Johns. And it was surprising that Mike Elko didn't bring him with him to Texas A&M. Instead, they hired, I believe it was Colin Klein from Kansas State to be the offensive coordinator in Aggieland. So everybody just assumed, Manny Diaz gets the job. Okay, defensive-minded coach, defensive background. You're just going to bring Kevin Johns, and he's going to be the guy running the offense. Right? Wrong. Jonathan Brewer is the offensive coordinator at Duke. And to answer the question about identity, I don't think we know fully what that is yet with a lot of the shifting parts and the new offensive coordinator. So better to catch Duke now if you're UConn than say when the Wake Forest game is for UConn later in the season, when teams have a better identity of a better sense of what their identity is. But what we've seen so far is a lot of pistol sets, a lot of, as you mentioned, some bubble screens, which might not be what UConn fans want to see all that much, but it plays to the talent that Duke has, like Jordan Moore, who's great at finding space, great at getting some of those yak yards, as you call it. That's what we've seen so far, but we don't have a fuller picture because it's only been a couple of games for Duke, and one of them was against an FCS team.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is how UConn is going to come out of the game, because they played, and again, the talent levels are totally different, but the games against Maryland and Merrimack were the polar opposite of what you could potentially draw up, right? Touchdown on every possession against Merrimack for the first half. Ross Dellinger, who I had on the show a couple weeks ago, said UConn's taking out their Big 12 frustrations on poor Merrimack today. And so, I think that's a big thing right now. Is I feel like this UConn team is coming in with a chip on their shoulder. I can't imagine, these kids aren't insulated anymore. Everybody knows about the Big 12 stuff, and maybe there's some frustration behind it. I don't really think that's a motivational factor, but it's definitely maybe in the back of your mind.
Probably not for football, just because they wouldn't have joined immediately right away. But I don't think you've hit the biggest question yet when it comes to UConn Duke, Mark. I don't think we hit on it yet. We need that. I need to ask it. Here it is. Like the way that we watch Taylor Swift, all these cutaways during any Chiefs game, and I guess even the U.S. Open on Sunday. How many Cooper Flagg cutaways are there going to be at Wallace Wade Saturday? He's going to be there. That's going to happen.
You think he's going to be there?
100%. 100%. He's going to be there.
Do you have confirmation of that? Or are you?
He was at the first game, and the indications I saw is that he most of the basketball players go to the home football games, especially before basketball season begins. And I guarantee you, with some of the regionality of it, Cooper Flagg is going to be in the building, and there's going to be at least one cutaway. I'm going to put the over-under at 1.5. 1.5 cutaways to Cooper Flagg during this football game on Saturday.
When we post this, I'll add that to the YouTube comments. I'll ask that question so people timestamp it, about 15-minute mark. The Cooper Flagg cutaways a la Taylor Swift when she's watching a Chiefs game. I like
have
it.
That's why like a drink with some like a red fruity drink. I guess he can't have alcohol. He's not 21 yet. But there's he's not even 18. Yeah. What am I talking about? He's got all his buddies there. I don't know who some of the celebrities that might be. Derek Lively was at the home opener. I don't know. Maybe Derek Lively's hanging out. Other members of the Brotherhood. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, when we watched the game last week for the home opener, Klingon was there. He was fresh off of his went to the U.S. Open the year before, the day before. So he was in town visiting his buddy Victor Rosa, who was a buddy of his from Bristol Central. Yeah, so you're right. This is why I have you on, Josh. To come with the hard hitting stuff. I appreciate that. Absolutely. We're going to shift focus on predictions. We kind of teased that a little bit in the first segment, and then we're going to play a fun game with Josh that I know he's going to appreciate, because we are going to. This is why he's a pro, because we're going to interject a little bit of UConn men's basketball as well as Duke men's basketball into the game that we're going to play coming up after this. Hey, UConn fans, I need a quick pick-me-up from time to time to get through a busy day. 5 Hour Energy has been the go-to for me for a long time, giving people just like you the boost they need. Whether you're grabbing a shot at the store or stocking up for multi-packs, it's always within reach. And guess what? Right now, you can snag 20% off your order at 5hourenergy.com with the promo code LOCKEDONCFB. But hurry, this deal's only good until September 30th. Head to 5hourenergy.com and keep your energy up. All right, we're back on Locked On UConn with Josh Graham from the Josh Graham Show on WSJS in the Triad here in North Carolina. I know in my neck of the woods. Josh, thanks for being with us as always. We talked about this a little bit in the first segment about predictions. The spread is 16.5. You got UConn was humiliated on the road in front of 12 people at Maryland. I joke around because the Big 12 was talking about how they need, there's some kind of stipulation. If UConn was to join the Big 12, they had to have like 40,000 people per game and all this other stuff. Maryland had like 30,000 people. So I would say in front of 12 people, they got their butts kicked in. But then they rebounded against Merrimack. Now we have another Duke game on the road at Wallace Wade Stadium. Tough place to play. Tell me about why you're choosing your pick and what is it?
There is a clear difference in talent, and I think Manny Diaz is a good enough coach that it's not a high ceiling with Manny Diaz. It's more of a higher floor that you get with a coach like him. And I trust the fact that this game's at home versus last year makes a difference as well. I don't think it's going to be high scoring in any sense. I think if UConn hits double digits in this game, I think they probably cover the spread. So I'm looking at something around 24-13, 27-13, something like that. That's the ballpark that I'm looking at. Duke to win by multiple scores, double digits, but no more. We'll say UConn covers.
Okay. Let me ask you a question around not your prediction, but
Please.
What would this mean to I'll ask the question both sides for UConn and for Duke. What would it mean for a win for UConn on the road at Duke? What would that do to in your opinion? You're a sports broadcaster. You've been doing this for a long time. Yeah. You've even covered UConn, I think the women, right?
I did.
So what would this do for UConn program perception wise?
It would be big to get an ACC scalp, to get a Power 5 scalp at a time where you've covered a lot of what the Big 12 conversations, and a lot of those conversations center on what UConn football is and isn't. And if they can get a win against a power conference school, maybe a lot of those ... not yet conversations get put back to the forefront where university presidents can pay attention. Now, I'm not saying that a win against Duke will push that over the goal line, but it's something that certainly couldn't hurt. And then with Duke, what it would mean, it all but guarantees that we're going to be looking at Duke, North Carolina at the end of September being undefeated, while so many of the conversations in the state of North Carolina have been about a lot of negatives. I mean, everybody watched on a national stage on ABC as NC State in Charlotte got beat by 40, and the Carolina Panthers are brutal, almost as bad as your Giants. And it's a lot of bad, but Duke off to a good start with Manny Diaz. You could be looking at a 4-0 versus 4-0 Duke Carolina football matchup at the end of the month, and that's what a win on Saturday probably gets you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna echo your sentiments there. I'm also gonna echo your prediction. I think UConn will cover. I think there's two gentlemen to look for in terms of, and maybe some betting for you if you're interested. I haven't looked at the spread on this, but anytime touchdowns, Skylar Bell or TJ Sheffield, they have 20 touchdowns between them in the Big Ten. Skylar Bell is number 3 in the country right now from transfers in receiving yards. I think he has 290 yards receiving in 2 games. He's a monster. He's literally built like Jamar Chase. Like if you just giving you a comp, right? And TJ Sheffield is the typical. He was a Purdue wide receiver, transferred it to UConn. He had a touchdown against Maryland. Good punt returner. So those two gentlemen, I think, are intriguing to potentially score touchdowns. But this is also something to watch. Who starts for UConn? I'm going to have this conversation on Friday with my folks from the TNT College Football Podcast. The smart money is on Nick Evers because they paid him a bunch of NIL money to come in as a 4-star recruit. But Joe Fagnano from the main transfer has looked very good, even against Maryland. So those would be the questions I have. But I think UConn ultimately will lose this game in a close one. I think it'll be about 24-17. I think UConn really is righted the ship. I think you call it a get-right game. You know, there's in the past, I've listened to your show. That Merrimack was a get-right game, figure everything out, get some confidence. And I think going into Duke, it's not going to be that culture shock against Maryland, like, whoa, this is a different level. They've already seen it. So
smarter play probably would be under 47.5 or under.
That's a great call.
Then
that's a great call.
Together and trying to stay away from garbage altogether could be you could be looking at like a 14-14 game where UConn's trying to surprise somebody in the fourth quarter, and you could just feel comfortable knowing that you have the under.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to play this game. I play this game with every one of my guests.
Please.
Without exception. The first question I ask, it's called Who Do You Want? And we usually do it UConn related. But because you're on the Duke side of this, ACC side of this, and I know you cover college basketball as I do, I want you to switch gears and think of every Duke player of all time, every UConn player of all time. My wife and I recently bought a caravan for our impending child that's coming, our third one. So we needed that extra row. So it got me thinking, who would you want to bring on a road trip? And so you're driving my Kia Caravan. Okay. Yeah. It's very nice. 2024. So you're going to be in style, Josh.
Okay.
You can put one person on your shotgun, and you can also bring 3 people with you. So 2 UConn players and 2 Duke players. And I want to know who they are and why.
Okay. This is interesting because, I'm glad you spelled out the type of vehicle because space matters. My first answer would be 100%. Would be Zion, but Zion's going to take up a lot of that Kia Caravan. That's the
Put
problem.
him in the third row.
Yeah, we could
all by himself.
But I'm not going to put Zion there. Instead, I'm going to put Emeka Okafor there because when I was younger, first time I went to a Charlotte Bobcats game, it was Emeka Okafor jersey night. And when I used to play on the video game, it was always Emeka Okafor and Gerald Wallace I was crushing people with. So Emeka Okafor, I just want to tell him that story. And I'm I think he'll enjoy it. I don't know. Maybe he won't, but I want him in my car for that reason from the UConn side. I wish, speaking of the Hornets, that they would have drafted Connor Clingan. So I'm trying to position it in the car where we're going to sit Connor as well. Also,
No, about Donovan Clingan.
Oh, what did I say? Connor? Sorry.
Connor,
I have a buddy named Connor Clingan. I do that all the time. He former voice of a baseball team around here.
You're fine.
Donovan Clingan. That's who I want to be sitting in the car as well. I don't know where we'll position him, but maybe he could tell me about the U.S. Open plus 2-time national champion. Let's go. Duke guys. See, I'm going to base this on my own experience of getting to know these players over the last 6 to 7 years. Some of my favorite players to be around. Gosh, there just isn't room for Zion. There just isn't. We can't put Donovan Clingan, Emeka Okafor, and Zion Williamson in a car. What car, Mark Zanetto, could fit those three men comfortably?
An Airstream.
Yes, an Airstream. So if it were an Airstream, we could potentially do that. So instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say, I'm split on a couple of people. I'm going to say, who was Paulo's right-hand person? That was Trevor Keels. Trevor Keels will be in this car just because he has a sick jersey collection and was always really good to us. And you know what? We'll go Jeremy Roach as well. We'll go Jeremy Roach just because. Oh, I take it back. Jared McCain. McCain over Jeremy Roach, because he has a thing called the positive potato, which is just like this little like knapsack that's in his locker. It's a potato that has a smiley face on it that says "I believe in you" written on it. Very Ted Lasso like. That anytime Duke was in a tough spot last year, Jared McCain with the biggest smile on his face and his painted fingernails would just bring out the positive potato. We might need that in the car. So in review, we got Donovan Clingan, Emeka Okafor, we got Jared McCain, and Trevor Keels. Those are the four that I have hanging out with me right now.
That's a good group. I like it. Listen, I appreciate you coming on today, talking a little bit of kind of not definitely a little out of my wheelhouse to do this on a weekly basis with the UConn football team, but we're working through it, and I'm really enjoying covering this squad. So I think it's a really great opportunity for them to kind of be on a semi-national stage on ESPN Plus with and showcase their talents against a tough Duke squad. So I appreciate your time. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. Before we go, thank you for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. For your second listen, try the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you squared away on all things, call it from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. It's an exciting time of season, talking about everything on the gridiron. Thanks for joining us today, Josh. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto. For Josh Graham, we ask you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.
Bang, bang.